Welcome, souls and spirits out there, for another episode of the podcast. I'm very excited today because I am joined by my lovely friend, Auset Rohn. And today we will be talking about the magical life of a woman named Omm Sety. And I love her so much. I knew I wanted to do this right after my reincarnation story because she is the most documented case of a reincarnation story in Egypt, I actually looked up. And so she blends my love of reincarnation and my love of Egypt. And Auset is actually the one that introduced me to her on our first trip to Egypt. And so thank you, Auset, for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me to talk about this very special topic. I think that your listeners are going to learn a lot today and maybe go on some of their own little rabbit holes, which is what we always want.
Yes, absolutely. I hope they look up her story because she is one of the most fascinating women I've ever read about.
Yeah, she really is.
So how did you're the one who introduced me to this amazing woman. How did you find out about Omm Sety?
Much like Hathor, she introduced herself to me. So I know I tell these stories and they sound so crazy pants, but they're real. And, it's like, it's like, how do you make this stuff up? You just end up sitting there. But I was working through my priestess at work to become ordained as a priestess of Isis. And towards the end of the program, then you commune with Isis to receive like an ordination name, a special name, which is
Mhm,
something that, the ancient Egyptians did. They had
mhm,
a special name that aligned them with a particular god or goddess, like Tutankhamun. His name, while Akhenaten was king, was Tut Akhenaten. And so I don't know, I'm butchering the whole thing up. But, anyways, his wife, also Ankhesenamun, she
mhm.
was Ankhesenaten. So that, the one that lives for the Aten, the one that lives for Amun. So it's a lineage type of thing, that you receive this name. And they had a ritual to do that included like 5 days of preparation. So on day one, you had to do a certain thing. On day two, you had to do a certain thing. And it's all to begin aligning you with the energy of Isis to receive your name. And I think I was on day three, and you were supposed to just chant something, have a vibrational exercise where you use sound as a vibration. And so I thought, okay, I'll just chant Om because that's pretty simple. So I was sitting in my living room in the middle of cornfields in Indiana, chanting Om. And all of a sudden, it was the same type of feeling that I got when Hathor introduced herself. Like all of a sudden, I'm shaking on the inside. My voice is shaking. My heart is pounding. And I kept hearing and then started speaking. And I would chant Om Seti, Om Seti, Om Seti. And I did that for like 5 minutes. And I was just like shaking inside all over. And so after a while, I was like, okay, that's all I'm getting. So I'll just stop. And so I had been previously looking at like comedic names and things to kind of like, I wasn't sure, like, is Isis going to just give me one in meditation, in a
Right.
dream? Do I pick it? Like, I didn't know what was going to happen. So one of the comedic names that I liked was Bentrishi, which means harp of joy. And I thought, well, that might be tied in with my name because I play the harp, so maybe that would be something, but I'll just wait, till I do the ritual. And then chanting Om Seti. So then it was the early days of Google. So I went and I didn't know how to spell it, but I did my best and it pulled up this woman named Omm Sety. And she was an English woman who became a Egyptologist, moved to Egypt in the 50s and believed that she had been a priestess in the temple in the time of Seti the First. And during that lifetime, her name, I'm getting goosebumps now, was Bentrishi. And I'm just like, I about fell out of my chair. So I'm just like, okay, so I have ties with this woman that I've never heard of in my life. She's having me chant her name. What does that mean? So for many years. I mean, and that happened back in like 2008, or maybe 2009. But it's just like been this kind of adventure and experience since then of trying to understand souls, your soul's journey, your spirit. How does that all align with the ancient Egyptians, the Ba, the Ka, the Ak, all of all of the parts of the body. And me introduction to Om Seti was that she introduced herself to me.
Wow. Yeah, she was just like, "Hey, you need to know me.
Yes.
Let me help you out here."
Yes, and I've had people ask, do you feel like you were her in a past life? And I sat with that for the longest time, many times. And it's like, well, I don't think I was actually her, but at the same time, there's a part of me that was. So I read a book that because I always had this feeling about that there was, time is an illusion. It's
Mhm.
not linear. That's how we can understand it. But there's this, I always like the TV shows that have parallel time frames that are going on or time travel ones. And so I was reading this book and it was called Beyond Past Lives. And then the subtitle was something about parallel lives. And I was like, oh, I need that. And the way that they described the soul was basically like your hand. So I don't know if
Ooh.
you can see that. And it's
Yeah.
very mystical.
Do.
Whoa. Like, see what happens when we're together. So it's like our soul is like our hand, where this is our whole hand, but it's made up of our thumb. It's made up of our fingernails. It's made up of our index finger, and there's different sections, and we have knuckles in different places. And so we can have the book described it as having like these soul families. So, like, we're all from the same soul family, but in my lifetime, I'm my thumb. And in Om Seti's lifetime, she was my index finger. And as Bentrashi, she was my knuckle for my index finger. Seti was over here, he's my ring finger. So you have all of these elements of your soul that are connected with why you cross paths, with people. Like, maybe you were maybe my sister in a past life, and in this lifetime, you're my friend. Maybe in a past life in Egypt, we were both priestesses in the temple together, and we knew one another because, you meet people and you're just like, I know you, or you just click with them right away.
Mhm.
And I think, don't discount the people also that you come across and you're like, I do not resonate with this person. Their vibration is really off. Well, maybe in a past life, they did you wrong in some way, or you did them wrong in some way, and so you have this karma. So you're in
Mhm.
the same lifetime, you're passing the same street, and then how do you handle your interactions with them this time around?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I said a lot of things there. Where do you want to rip off of?
Yeah, no, I love that. I wanna do a whole side quest on parallel lives because I have had similar instances with, like, dreams and stuff, and when I've kind of sat with it and kind of talked to my spirit people and was like, "What the heck was that?" I've kind of come to the understanding it was more like a parallel life and it was just like slightly shifted a bit. But yeah, I love the whole idea of a soul family and my understanding of like the soul and our connections with other people is just like I'm constantly adapting it and like adding on to it. And it's really helped me shape my experiences with other people. So especially like the conflict. So when I do have like a conflict with someone and I'm like, what is this trying to teach me? Like, I start to look at it as like, okay, is it just this person or is this like an overall theme in my life that I'm like, am I meant to be learning this like as a lesson or is there's some specific karma with this person that I'm just like not you know what I'm trying to say?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's helped me kind of shift the way I interact with people, and it's helping me, like, understand even the people that I have conflict with, like, in my life, like my blood dad, like, me and him have never got along, like, it was just, like, apparent from the beginning, and I've come to the conclusion, I'm like, there's something there from, like, there has to be a past life, like, karmic thing because it's always been that way. And I think especially the people like family that, like I always hear the saying, "You can't get rid of your family." Well, I think there's a reason for that, like, karmic-wise, like, it causes you to keep having interactions with those people so you can kind of work on this stuff. But it's so interesting through, like, Omm Seti's story of, like, the things that come up from past lives and how we remember them, how we have these memories as these soul beings and, her that that's how I kind of break apart the soul and the spirit. So, like, I think of Venturshi as, like, one of her spirits, and then Om Seti as one of her spirits, and so, like, it's like they're going out and having the experiences and then storing that data in, like, her little, like, bookshelf in the Akashic records, and then so, like, that's how she remembers or has, like, these experiences and how I think she remembers them as Om Seti. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at that.
I
Yeah.
I I'm so, like, practical, like, everything has to have, like a place for itself, like, in my physical life, in my house, and so when I think of spiritual work, I'm like, "Alright, I have to, like, figure out how this ties in, or it's just gonna be, like."
Mhm.
I don't like concepts that I, like, can't grasp whatsoever, like, I need to make it make sense, and so, like,
Yes.
that's how
Bec
that's that's how it's, like, made sense in my head, or like, we're like we as mediums when we talk to spirits and it's like how but I believe in reincarnation. So what if like the spirit of the person I'm trying to talk to has already reincarnated? I've had someone ask me that. They're like, "Well, if
Mhm.
they've reincarnated, how can you talk to them? They're in the physical life." And I'm like, yeah, but I think I can still talk to a piece of that person as their spirit, as this person who we knew, like, in this lifetime before they reincarnated. Like,
Yeah,
that's how it makes sense in my brain. Otherwise, it's like, "Well, we're gonna have to wait until they, pass on again to find them." Like, I don't like that idea.
right, right.
I I like the idea that we're just, like, so connected, we can kind of talk to everybody, like, at any time. Like, there's some lapses in it, and there's, things going on, like, within their own lives and the spirit world and stuff, but, like, I feel like we're all connected all the time, so, like, there's truly because time is an illusion and, everything is connected, I feel like we can always kind of dive into that if we need to. That kind of went off into a
That's
whole other
okay.
realm there.
But yeah, that's okay, but, like, when people ask me, "Do you think that you are a reincarnation of her in some way?" It's like, well, I suppose I could be part of Ventressy because she's long been gone by the time I was born.
Right.
But, I was born then when I was about 14 or so is when Omm Sety passed away. So it's like, well, I don't, like you were saying, that she's still living. And then I was born, so I can't necessarily be her, but I could be a part of her, which would be Bentrishi, which is why I was enjoying that name or being drawn to that name. And then that's why Om Seti came to me because that was her name. And she's like, you need to know about your connection to the past,
Yeah.
so as a priestess.
Mhm.
And I find it really interesting that so much of, Om Seti's life, when she made it finally to Egypt and she made it to Abydos, because she was in Egypt for quite a long time before she actually made it
19
to
years.
Abydos. Yes. And so you've been to Egypt and even today, to get to Abydos, it is a journey. It is a pilgrimage. So
Mhm.
that's just from Luxor. So, imagine for her being up in the Giza area in Cairo, how
Mhm.
long it would have been, to take her to get all the way down there in that time period with their modes of transportation. But when she finally got there, she upheld, it was not the Egypt it is today. So she was able to do her morning opening prayers and bring the offerings to the gods and re-enliven that practice because she
Mhm.
knew it inside of her.
Mhm.
She had had that encounter with Seti when she was 14, and it opened up so much for her inside of her memories that when she got there into the temple, she went in barefoot. She left the offering. She knew how to talk to the snakes. to get them out, of places because she knew the language and the spells. And I think I read somewhere that, she tried it and it didn't work, so she pronounced it differently and then it worked. So, it's just these memories that you have. And even for me, and I'm sure even for you, that there's things that we do within our spiritual practice that we know inside. We can't necessarily describe it per se, but we know it's a thing and we follow it. And then we read something later and it identifies that and confirms it. Like recently I was reworking my priestess program and I was doing the ritual for the Pagamental days, like the birth of the five gods and what you had to do each day for each of them. And I knew somewhere inside of me that you had to bring them offerings and you had to say a certain prayer to them. And so I was at the point where I was, putting together prayers and like trying to look up ancient prayers to the specific gods. And then I came across a book and it had, the calendar and it had from the I think it was from the Cairo calendar, the things that you were supposed to say to the gods on their birthday. So I was just like, okay, so it's just these memories that we hold from the past, and I think that Omm Sety experienced that as well, being in the temples.
Well, and the stuff that she did, I mean, she did stuff in the temples that, we're not allowed to do now. And there's a different, like, I know you have a strong connection to Abydos, but I could feel a difference when I walked in there. And I think it's because of her. I think it's because she lived there and she did the practices. Like, I mean, they just let her, "All right, yeah, go ahead and do what you," and she wasn't taking no for an answer. She was like, "I'm doing this."
Right,
But
right.
I think it's because she's done that and, like, so recently that, like, the energy there, like, the magic there is stronger for me. It's like I can feel that, like, this place has been worshipped recently. Does that make sense?
Mhm, mhm.
It feels like that in all of them. I mean, I can feel the power in all of them. But, there's always been something special about Abydos, and, like, the more, like, been there and the more I think about it, and the more I dive into her story, I'm like, "I think it's her. I think she helped kind of rekindle that spark," and so, it's not so dormant, like, it's been, like, used and loved recently, and that was all because of her, and so it made me start thinking about, like, how they talk about the Ka and, like, the statues of the gods and, like, speaking to them and offering them stuff and unliving them. That's how I think of, like, the temple as a whole and, like, the Ka, the soul of that temple, and, like, she nurtured that and loved it and, like,
Mhm.
brought it back a little bit.
Mhm. And it's, if you look at, old images or photographs of the temple, it's not the temple that we see today. There's so much that got reconstructed and put back together because it was in disarray. And, when she got there, she helped to, she was an Egyptologist, archaeologist. She did a lot of transcribing of the hieroglyphic texts and things like that. And in her work as an Egyptologist. So when she gets to Abydos, and then in her communications at night with Seti, which was so cool because, like, she would sleep on the roof of her home, and she never would sleep in a room with the window shut because then
Mhm,
he could go in and out, and so she would talk to him and ask him modern day things, like, "Where are we gonna find this?"
mhm.
And he would tell her where it was located. Then she would go and tell the Egyptologist, "You need to dig there," and they're like, "This lady's crazy, she brings
Yep.
the things to the temples," and so finally they listened, and what happened? They found what they were looking for, so they learned to trust her. The temple, yeah, that temple feels very different. And it's always interesting to me that you don't necessarily have to pay for a private visit there. It's usually quite empty and not many people make that journey there. So the people that do, it's very special to them.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love it's she was the first woman in the Department of Iniquities there in Egypt. She was the
Hmm.
very first woman. Like, reading through her story, she has a no nonsense way about her, and she's just like, "I'm gonna do whatever," and, like, her wit is really it's like dry humor, but it's, like, it's so funny, and she just, she would just tell it she wouldn't tell, like, everyone her story about SETI. The only one I really saw that she kind of told the whole thing to was the Han her friend Hanny, I think that's how you
Mhm,
say his name,
mhm.
Hanny. But, she told a few people that she thought she had a past life and that because they would, like, test her. They would be like,
Yeah.
and even her learning hieroglyphs from Budge, and he was like, how like, just this young girl go into the British Museum and how like, "How do you know this?" Or she would spend her money, like, finding little antique or little things from Egypt in, like, little off shops in England, and she was, like, sending them back, and I forgot about the story, like, one of the people in the antiquities department, like, reached out and was like, "Who the heck is this person?" Like, they were trying to figure out who was, like, sending them all this stuff, and they sent, like, a letter or I forget if it was a letter or they called, like, her local, like, spot police place or whatever, and her parents were having a
Okay.
fit. They're like, "What are you doing?" Like, someone from the police just came by to, like, figure out who this was, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, that's me. I'm, sending back, like, the Egyptian stuff back to Egypt."
Yes,
She
it's so fun.
she was just such a hardcore woman, like, you don't think about a woman in that time period being, like, I mean, she was a true kind of trailblazer and, like, she wasn't all about being, like a stay-at-home wife and, all of these things, like, she was determined to, like, do the things that she knew she needed to do, like, for her
Right. Yes, and it's funny when you talk about her parents and the police and all that sort of thing, like, "What are you doing?" She was not a everyday young English girl,
Right.
when you're stealing away from school to go to the museum and learn to read hieroglyphs with the guy who was, transliterating and translating the Book of the Dead, that's quite something, and she used to put together these passion plays of the lamentations of Isis and Nephthys and,
Yeah.
get dressed up, and she was quite the singer, and, she really Egypt was alive in her. So, she just didn't fit into where she was placed in this lifetime. But she was here in this lifetime for very specific reasons and purpose. And I think maybe part of that was to teach us all about past lives and perhaps karma and things like that as well. So, yeah.
Mhm. Her story really just shows me, like, anything is possible.
Right.
Like, anything I mean, reading her story and listening to her talk, like, I have no doubt in my mind that, like, those memories are real. Reincarnation is real. Okay, so one of the interesting things about Seti's story, she didn't just have, this near-death experience and then reincarnation memories. She actually had visitation from the pharaoh Seti. I think that's what really, like, sets her whole story apart from everyone else because there's a whole other dynamic and aspect of, spirit and, like, that type of experience. So she had her first experience at, like, 14, right? I think it was?
Mhm. Yes.
And he came, like, to her bed, and at that time, he showed himself as, like, a mummy because she said she recognized him from, like, photos she had seen of his mummy. And then
Mhm.
she had similar experiences, and then many, many years later, when she was living in Egypt, he started coming to her more looking like a man in his 50s, like when she would have known him in her past life. And I think that's interesting that she started having these different experiences, and when I read about it in the book, it said when she asked him that, it said he was bound by our ancient moral rules, and the council gave him kind of like do's and don'ts on what he could and couldn't do. Who do you think the council is?
Well, that's really interesting because throughout the coffin texts, especially, you'll read about these councils, and who is the head of the council. And you have the Ennead that's the council, and you have Thoth that heads up the council, and Neith that heads up a council. So maybe there's this like hierarchy of like what we have here in the United States. There's a Congress, there's a
Mhm.
Senate, they have balances and then someone oversees all of it. I don't know, but yeah, I think that the council is made up of the gods, and that's based off of just the way that they're kind of also described within the coffin texts, the various groups.
Yeah, I started to think about it as, like, I thought about it in, like Beetlejuice, the underworld where there's, like, different, like, like, spirits have, like, their different offices and then places where they check in, and, like, I pictured, like, a whole separate room, and it was like, "Alright, like, you're wanting to go basically, like, be a ghost or go, like, visit someone in the world, alright, here's your do's and don'ts list, like, make sure you follow these."
Right, right. Nobody likes this movie, Gods of Egypt, but I really enjoyed it.
I did too.
And yeah, and the thing that I thought was really interesting, was that whole thing, when you talk about the council, it says, all right, you can go, but only a certain amount of times, and you can only talk about these things. But in that movie, also, the boy was trying to commune with the girl that he loved, and Anubis shows up and he's like, if the living are not supposed to talk to the dead, and so it's like, oh, yeah, there's these rules that they have. And even remember when we went to visit the tomb of the boy in the Valley of the Queens, where it
Mhm.
tells the whole story about it's Kamwast's son, and he's a magician, and his son passes away when he's like 11 years old, and he is shown on the temple walls going with his son through each of the gates, helping him to navigate the afterlife and go safely and get to the goddess. And he gets to the end gate, and it's such an emotional depiction, where he's like waving goodbye basically, because that last gate he cannot go through, but he was allowed to go into the underworld at least up until there, and then he had to, say his goodbyes. So I feel like, Omm Sety and Seti were kind of in that, situation as well, where, technically perhaps they didn't like for, the particular people of the past to commune physically with the people that are living now, but that there are definitely exceptions to that, obviously with Omm Sety and Seti. And then obviously, like with me and Omm Sety, like, I don't know, why did I start chanting her name? Where did that come from? Nowhere in my conscious memory, that's for sure. So, and then when she would meet with Seti, there were these, nightly walks, or, they would talk and she would be able to ask him all of these questions. And now I wanted to tell you too, there was that time. So there's two books written by a woman, author named Yvonne Harlick, and she wrote about Omm Seti's life, and she also wrote about Bentrici's life. So, and what I liked about it was kind of like in the Poisonwood Bible, where you have each chapter is like the same events, but it's a different character's perception of it. And Yvonne wrote it like there's a chapter on Bentrici, and there's a chapter on Dorothy Eady's life, and then a chapter on Ventressy. So she talks about how she entered the temple, and, how she met Seti, and how, in that lifetime and became his secret lover, and how she was removed, and things like that. And it was really wild because in the same way that Seti visited Omm Seti, I had an experience where I felt like Seti visited me, where I was reading the book about, well, let me back up. The night before, I remember I'd been laying in bed and my husband had his back turned to me, and I was just rubbing his back and kind of tracing. He had this big tattoo on his back of an eagle or a hawk. And so I was tracing that, and like these words that kept coming into my head as I was touching his skin was that touching his skin was like touching the walls of the temple. And that just kind of stayed with me. And then the next day, I was sitting on the couch and I was reading from the book about Bentrici's story. And she had been with Seti and they were together, and she was rubbing his back, and she was thinking that touching his skin was as sacred as touching the temple walls. And I had felt Seti like right before that, like come to sit beside me. And then I read this. I'm just like, that was a really strange, strange feeling to
Yeah.
have. But, it made me appreciate Omm Seti's connection with the pharaoh Seti, and it kind of helped to make all of these people from history real, in
Mhm,
such a way that I hadn't not necessarily experienced before.
mhm.
So, because I didn't even really know who Seti was before, I wasn't she introduced herself to me, and then learned more about him. And, being able to visit him in the museum, they've got his body there and paying tribute to him. And yeah, so I can really appreciate her times that she had with him and how special those were.
I started thinking about these experiences she had and the rules like that the council gives and like how that's not necessarily the norm that people have these experiences. And I kind of question, like why her? Why did like these things happen to her? And I kind of I came to the conclusion that when she had her near death experience and it kind of almost knocked loose like these memories, she became so driven to understand that it was almost like he kind of became a guide for her in this life to help her like figure out her path in this life because everything, I feel like we reincarnate and we come back so we can learn and experience. And I think because her life as Venture she got cut so short, whether some things say that they killed her, some things say that she committed suicide because of the whole ordeal, but her life was cut so short, she was so young. I feel like it's almost like she came back as Dorothy Eady and then becoming Omm Sety, like helped like follow along that path of the priestess that she was supposed to lead. And so her having those encounters with him, and that's the reason why he was allowed to kind of come back and like write some of that karma that rewrite some of that karma that like they experienced together, and how they were in love, and they didn't get their time was cut short, their love was cut short, and so this was just kind of another way to help that along, help kind of that story along. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it's interesting that she encountered him at 14, which was
Mhm.
about the time that, she died as Ventressy.
Yeah.
So, it is interesting, that, okay, you're at this age now and we have to continue.
Mhm.
So, now we're going to start to reawaken some of those memories. And how do you read hieroglyphs and, really pull you into studying the temples and studying Egyptology and get you to where you need to be. And then finally, you'll be able to be there, And her story with, with Seti is such the Isis and Osiris story, of them communing in the afterlife. Isis was still here, and Osiris, even though she had revived him, he never could fully be in this realm anymore. He always had to be in the underworld. And
Mhm.
so that's where she would always have to visit him. And so, Seti herself, she was in the role of Isis, being able to be in this world, but she had to go astrally to be able to visit with Seti, and um, Isis and Osiris's story in Abydos, it's such a city of it's such a necropolis. There's that big word I want to say that it's a necropolis city, but it's so tied in with the stories of the passion play of the lamentations of Isis and Nephthys, and walking in those two worlds.
Well, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the story of, you know, Set, I think it's funny that all the names kinda tie in together. Set, chopping Osiris up into 14 pieces and scattering him around wasn't and then they built temples where, like, they found the pieces. Wasn't Abydos where his heart was supposed to be buried?
Its head.
His head, okay. I was thinking it was the heart, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, that kinda makes even more sense with everything being connected and the love. Maybe it's because Valentine's Day just happened with all the love
I
and the
know,
hearts.
all the love.
The head, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But well, and then the Osirian is there, and, it's even older. It's
Yeah,
old and
I feel like it's older, and so, people will think that the Osirian is a temple, but actually it's a tomb. It's the tomb of Osiris, because when you enter it, that's how you enter it. When we would take our tours, we'd go around the backside, and we would go down the tunnel. And when you go down the tunnel, there's the text on the walls of the 12 gates and the Amduat and the Book of Hidden Chambers. Like all of these things are there to help you to navigate it. And then they have the sarcophagus chamber area. So I mean, it's a tomb that's there. So it's built in a way people think that it's like super duper old because of the way that it's built. But also, I think that this is my opinion, and I've not read this anywhere else. But when you look at, because they compare it to the Sun Temple near the Sphinx in Giza, in
Okay.
Cairo, and the way that those blocks are, just these big squared types of blocks. And that's the type of shape that the blocks are in the Osirian. Well, if that's the Sun Temple, right? And it's built with that type of architecture. And then you look at the Osirian. What is the Osirian cycle? It's that Osiris becomes one with the sun. So it's a solar Osirian cycle. So it would make sense to build his tomb in such a way that it's built to mirror a sun temple, but that it's a tomb because of the Osirian solar cycle and death and rebirth that the sun has, Osiris also has.
Mhm.
So I've not ever heard anybody describe it in that way, but that was one of the things where when I was there and I had been in these places and I'm sitting within myself to ask the question, you know, for clarity, that's how it was shown to me. So I was like, "Oh, that's really beautiful because, as you know, in ancient Egypt, everything has a deep meaning. That's why it's the Egyptian mysteries,
Mhm.
because everything has a meaning. There's a meaning as to why certain things are on certain walls and which direction they're facing, and the flow of the sun, and how the things on the wall mirror the path of the sun, particularly down at Abu Simbel within the temples there. So, I mean, to me, that was just like really special, to have it mirror that, but really interesting that nobody else has said that out loud. So, I guess here your listeners have a
First time. That
secrets of
makes
the
so much
Osirian.
makes so much sense though, and, I guess it's kind of most people, I guess, do say it's like a temple now, but that never felt right to me either. But it's so interesting that she would go and just, like, why did she think that the water there would, like, cure things? Like, why was she like, how did that came to be? Like, I always wondered that. She just would go and dive in because it was just so full of water. She would just dive into the water and she was like, "Yep, whatever's wrong with me will be cured after this, and, yeah,
Yeah.
drink
Yeah.
this," and
I don't know, maybe it was tied to, their practices of purification with water, always having to bathe in the water, the belief that, you were given water in the afterlife and, its healing properties for you.
maybe if it is the tomb of Osiris and the water is connected to Osiris and his restoration and regenerative properties, maybe that's where she kind of got the correlation.
Well, that's where life begins, is in the
Ye
water, whether it's in
yeah.
the noon and where was Osiris uh thrown into? He was thrown into the water. He
Nutrient,
was
yeah.
retrieved from the water. Moses,
Mhm.
was retrieved.
Tree
So there's your other little rabbit hole. Moses was retrieved from the water, and seems like I remember hearing that if you died by drowning, like there were certain steps, like you already were an Osiris, that you didn't have to do certain things in the afterlife because you died in the same way as Osiris and you were regenerated in those waters with him. I forget where I was reading that from, but if you died by drowning, then you were immune to having to do certain things. So you
Interesting.
got a free pass because of your special connection then with Osiris in the water.
I never knew that. Interesting.
Yeah, and so do you remember when we were at Hermopolis and there's that princess that drowned
Yeah,
because she was
yeah.
trying to her lover was in the army or something in the
Cross to her.
military and she was trying to get to him and her father didn't want her seeing this boy and she was like I'm going to see him anyways. And so she went into the water and she was swept away and drowned and what a I think it might have been something that had to do with things that I was reading about her in particular,
That would make
because
sense.
she had died by drowning and yeah, so. But yeah, water is where all of life comes from. The lotus comes up from the mud in the water.
Yeah, interesting. I never put that together. Maybe I did and I forgot, who knows?
Yeah.
But I always thought about that. I'm like, where did she get this just, like, start drinking the water in this really old place?
Yeah. Well, and it's a sacred place. It's
It
a
is,
sacred
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting after I read her books and you introduced me to her, I got a couple of messages from her from at camp, at service, and, like, no one else knew it was her, but I knew it was her because and it was someone the one I remember specifically was from someone who had absolutely no ties to Egypt whatsoever, had no idea who they were talking to, but they said they had this they're like, "There's a lady here, like, she's very stern, no nonsense, very dry humor, and she says she's a snake charmer." And I just, like, sat back and I was like, "I don't know a snake charmer, like, what?" And then they were like, "Lexi, I don't know why she wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And as I think you know and everyone knows about me, I don't like snakes. There's some kind of weird I don't know if there's a past life thing there, but even, like, teeny tiny ones, I see them and I scream and I run. And so I was like, "Do I really wanna talk to, this snake charmer lady? What are we doing here?" And she said I remember the person saying, "This is someone that is connected with your Egyptian stuff and your priestess, like, your priestess stuff." And so, like, this person knew enough about me to know that, but they were like, "Snake charmer lady, something to do with your priestess stuff." And I was like I immediately thought, Seti. And I was like, "Okay." And they said, "You never got to know her in this lifetime, but you know her from other things, and that she is so proud of the path that you're walking. She wants you to know that you are a daughter of her heart." Like, I remember that line specifically, "You're a daughter of her heart," and that she is very proud that you have kind of taken on this path similar to her life. And it was just kind of that she was like it's like she was proud that I was keeping, Egypt alive and the priestess path alive, like, stuff like that.
Wow.
And so I knew it was her, and I was
You
like, "Oh
never
my
told
gosh."
me that before.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I didn't really remember that until we started talking about having this conversation about Seti, and then I started thinking about my connection to her, and I got that message at camp, and it was that happened, so we went to Egypt for the first time in 2018. That's when I read her book. 2019, this was right before me and Brandon got engaged. So I got that message right before I got that I'm gonna have to find the paper because I keep all the papers from services. But I got that message in, like, April, and then on the way, we were traveling to Niagara Falls, and that's where we got engaged. On our ride there, I was reading Hanny's book about her, Omm Sety's Egypt, and I can't find it. I think I let someone borrow it, but I actually like that one, like, better than
Me too. I
The
like that
Search
one.
for Omm Sety. But
Yes.
I was reading that on our ride to when we got engaged, and I was reading it in the car on the way there, and I finished it, and I started crying in the car. Like, like, closed the book, and I just looked at it, and I just started crying. And Brennan's like, what is wrong with you? Like, are you okay? Like, what's going on?" And I said, "I am so sad I will never get to meet this lady in this lifetime." I said, "I am so sad that, like, this is the last of her story that I get to read because, there's not a whole lot of I mean, there's stuff out there about her, but there's not a whole lot of stuff out there because of the time that she lived in." And
Right.
I was just so sad, and that night, like, I cried about it for a while, and I was like, "What is wrong with me? Like, why am I so upset?" And that night, I was kind of said we got to our destination, and we actually got engaged that day, and I was kind of sitting and just, like, kind of processing the entire day
Yeah.
and, like, everything that had happened, and I went back to that moment. I was like, why was I so sad about that? Or, what's going on? And I didn't really get an answer, but it was like, you just, you have such a connection to this lady and the life that she lived, that is how you should live your life too. And then I basically got the answer, like, remember that everything is connected and this doesn't have to be the last that you hear from her.
Right,
And
right.
so I started thinking about more like when sometimes when I do my Egyptian stuff, I think of her and I think of like I kind of call her in like I do goddesses and stuff. I'm like, okay, like walk beside me as I do this, or like
Yeah, yeah.
help lend me your wisdom as I do this because I can't drop everything and go like live in a mud hut and I can't do that.
Give me like 4 months to do this, just one section of 4 months.
I can't really do that, but, like, I still wanna live my life authentically, and I wanna live it, as a priestess, and she is kind of like the definition of someone doing that. I mean, she went hardcore with it, but, like,
Yeah,
as a modern day priestess, and she was even ordained in the Fellowship of Isis, and I love that. I love that they, like, acknowledged her as, a
yeah.
priestess in that, and but yeah, she's just so interesting, and I was just yeah, I don't know why. I was just so sad that I was never gonna be able to see her in this
Yes.
lifetime.
Yes, I know, me too. I have that same feeling, and I love, like, pulling up on YouTube all the videos of her where she's talking and sharing things about the temple or, things like that. It's just really it feels very special, to
Mhm.
have that connection with her because you, like me, you weren't looking for that. You weren't really fascinated by Cleopatra, and seeking to, connect with her or things like that. It happened. You're sitting there and you're receiving this message that you weren't expecting, and I think
Mhm.
that that makes it that much more potent because then I don't know, it feels very authentic. It feels very organic. It's not anything constructed or, well, maybe that's just my imagination. I'm trying to make that. No, it's very clear. You did not make this up because how could you? It's so, you can't tell a lot of people because they'll be like, what was in your Cheerios this morning? But you're like, I know I'm sane. I know I'm sane. It really was a thing that happened. I
I
wasn't
promise
on
not
anything.
taking any recreational drugs.
Nothing. Nothing. Yes.
Well, thank you. We're about to run out of time, I see.
I know. Okay.
Thank you so much for talking with me today and talking about this wonderful woman and reincarnation. It's just I could talk about this. I could create a whole podcast just on
I
this.
know. I know.
It's so fascinating. I'll have to maybe we can have another conversation one day just on maybe your past life thoughts and experiences and things like that because you we can just go so many ways with it. It's just so fascinating. Maybe I can bring you back for the parallel life talk
Ooh,
because that's
parallel
one
lives.
that's one I wanna get into. Okay,
Well,
well, thank
thank you
you.
for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for spending this time.